The lantern's glow pierced the darkness like a beacon of hope, as Josephine McKenna clutched her infant daughter closer to her chest, desperately trying to muffle the child's cries against the worn fabric of her shawl. The bitter Montana winter air of 1875 bit through her threadbare clothing, and her body trembled from both fear and cold as she pressed herself deeper into the shadows of the dilapidated barn. The sound of approaching footsteps made her blood run cold, and she held her breath, praying the darkness would conceal her presence. Yates Colton dismounted his dappled gray stallion with practiced ease, his boots crunching against the snow-covered ground as he approached the weathered barn door. The seasoned cowboy had been riding fence lines all day for the Rockingham Ranch when the approaching blizzard forced him to seek shelter. His calloused hand pushed open the door, wincing at the loud creak that pierced the silence. With practiced movements, he secured his horse, removed his saddle, and began to set up camp for the night. The unmistakable sound of a baby's whimper stopped his movements cold. Yates reached for his revolver instinctively, eyes narrowing as he scanned the shadowy interior. "Who's there?" He called out, his voice firm but not threatening. "Show yourself. I mean no harm." Josephine's heart hammered in her chest as she weighed her options. The baby's cries were growing louder, and she knew hiding was no longer possible. With trembling hands, she adjusted her grip on her daughter and stepped hesitantly from the shadows. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. "Please don't hurt us." Yates lowered his gun immediately, stunned by the sight before him. The woman couldn't have been more than 20, her face smudged with dirt and tears, her dark hair falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. In her arms was a tiny bundle from which emerged the plaintive cries of an infant. "Madam, I'm not going to hurt you," he said, holstering his weapon. "What in God's name are you doing out here in this weather with a baby?" Instead of answering, Josephine swayed on her feet, exhaustion and hunger finally taking their toll. Yates moved quickly, catching her before she collapsed completely. The baby wailed louder, sensing her mother's distress. "Easy now," he murmured, guiding her to a pile of hay. "Sit down before you fall down." Josephine sank gratefully onto the makeshift seat, clutching her daughter protectively against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Yates nodded, retrieving his saddlebag. "When's the last time you ate, madam?" "Yesterday morning," she admitted reluctantly. "And the baby? I don't know if I have enough milk left for her." Without a word, Yates lit his lantern, casting a warm glow throughout the barn. He pulled out a canteen of water and some jerky, offering them to the woman. "It's not much, but it'll help until morning. The storm's getting worse, we'll both have to stay put tonight." Josephine accepted the water gratefully, taking small sips before turning her attention to the fussing infant. "Hush now, Emma," she soothed, rocking the child gently. Yates watched them, his weathered face softening slightly. "Name's Yates Colton, madam. I work for the Rockingham about 15 miles east of here." "Josephine McKenna," she replied quietly, "and this is Emma." "And where's your husband, Mrs. McKenna?" Yates asked, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of deception. Josephine's expression hardened. "I'm not married, Mr. Colton, and that's a story I'd rather not tell a stranger." Yates nodded, respecting her privacy. "Fair enough. But you should know, any woman traveling alone with a baby in these parts is taking a mighty big risk." "I didn't have a choice," she whispered, her eyes downcast. The cowboy didn't press further. Instead, he built a small fire in the stone pit at the center of the barn, careful to ensure proper ventilation. The flames cast dancing shadows across the walls as Josephine slowly ate the jerky he'd provided. "The baby needs more than what I can offer," Yates said after a moment. "When the storm breaks, I'll take you both to the ranch. Mrs. Miller, the cook, has a new grandchild. She might have some suggestions. Josephine's eyes widened with alarm. No, I can't go there. I can't risk being found. Yates studied her carefully. Someone after you, Mrs. McKenna. Her silence was answer enough. Well, he said finally, whoever you're running from won't find you tonight. Get some rest. I'll keep watch. As the night deepened, the storm raged outside, snow piling against the barn walls. Yates sat with his back against a post, his rifle across his lap, watching as Josephine finally succumbed to exhaustion, curling protectively around her daughter on the bed of hay he'd arranged. The lantern's flame flickered, casting her face in a gentle glow. Something stirred in Yates's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. This woman and her child were in trouble, and despite his better judgment, he found himself making a silent vow to see them safe. "Sleep well, Mrs. McKenna," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "You're under my protection now." Morning broke with pristine clarity, the storm having passed during the night. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the barn walls, illuminating the frost-covered interior. Josephine woke with a start, instinctively reaching for Emma, who was no longer by her side. Panic seized her until she heard the soft murmur of a deep voice nearby. Yates sat on an upturned bucket, holding the baby awkwardly but securely in his large hands. He was speaking to the child in hushed tones, his rough voice gentled in a way that surprised Josephine. "Your mama needs her rest, little one," he was saying. "You and I can get acquainted while she sleeps." Josephine watched silently, struck by the tenderness with which the rugged cowboy handled her daughter. His face, clean-shaven but weathered from years under the sun, softened when he looked at Emma. For a moment, Josephine allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to have such a man care for them permanently, then quickly banished the thought. "Good morning," she said, sitting up and brushing hay from her skirts. Yates looked up, a hint of color touching his cheeks at being caught in such a gentle moment. "Madam," he nodded. "Hope you don't mind. She was fussing and you needed sleep." "Thank you," Josephine said, rising to her feet and crossing to take Emma from him. Her fingers brushed against his as she did so, and a jolt of awareness passed between them. Yates cleared his throat, standing abruptly. "Storm's past. We should head out while the day's clear." "Mr. Colton," Josephine began hesitantly, "I appreciate your kindness, but I can't go to your ranch. I'm heading west to Oregon." "Oregon?" Yates's eyebrows rose. "That's more than 1,000 miles, Mrs. McKenna, on foot with a baby in winter. You wouldn't make it past the next town." "I have to try," she insisted, a desperate edge to her voice. Yates ran a hand through his dark hair, considering. "At least let me take you to Silver Creek. It's a small town about a day's ride from here. You can rest, get supplies." Josephine hesitated, weighing her options. The truth was, she had nowhere else to go and barely any money left. A town meant potential work, perhaps enough to earn passage on a stagecoach heading west. "Very well," she agreed finally. "To Silver Creek, and then we part ways." Yates nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with this arrangement. "We'll need to ride double. The trail's too deep with snow for walking." An hour later they were on their way, Josephine seated behind Yates on his stallion, Emma securely bundled against her chest in a makeshift sling Yates had fashioned from a spare shirt. Josephine tried to maintain a proper distance, but the uneven terrain forced her to hold onto his waist to keep her balance. Yates was acutely aware of her arms around him, of the warmth of her body pressed against his back. It had been years since he'd been this close to a woman, and never one with such obvious secrets. As they rode, he found himself wondering what had driven her to flee with nothing but the clothes on her back and a newborn baby. How old is she? he asked over his shoulder, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. 6 weeks, Josephine replied, her breath warm against his neck. Born on the trail. No, her voice grew tight. She was born in a small town east of here. We left when she was 3 weeks old. Yates wanted to ask more but sensed her reluctance. Instead, he pointed to a ridge in the distance. We'll stop there for a midday rest. There's a creek that should have running water despite the freeze. They made camp briefly by the creek, where Yates managed to catch 2 fish that they cooked over a small fire. Josephine ate hungrily, then used the opportunity to tend to Emma, turning away modestly as she nursed her daughter. Yates busied himself with caring for his horse, giving her privacy, but his thoughts remained on the mysterious woman. There was an intelligence in her eyes that suggested education, and despite her current state, she carried herself with a natural grace. She wasn't a typical frontier woman, that much was clear. As Josephine finished nursing Emma, the baby began to fuss again, her tiny face scrunching up in discomfort. "What's wrong with her?" Yates asked, concern evident in his voice. Josephine rocked Emma gently. "She's colicky, I think. It's been happening every afternoon." Without asking, Yates approached and held out his hands. "May I?" Surprised, Josephine hesitantly handed Emma to him. With practiced movements that belied his earlier awkwardness, Yates placed the baby against his shoulder, one large hand supporting her bottom while the other patted her back gently. Within minutes, Emma let out a tiny burp and her cries subsided. "You seem experienced with babies," Josephine observed, watching him with new interest. A shadow passed over Yates's face. "My sister had 4 little ones. I helped when I could." "And where is your sister now?" "Gone," he said simply, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. He returned Emma to Josephine's arms. "We should keep moving if we want to reach Silver Creek by nightfall." They continued their journey in companionable silence, the vast Montana landscape stretching around them. Snow-covered plains gave way to rolling hills, and as the afternoon sun began its descent, the first buildings of Silver Creek appeared on the horizon. Josephine felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as they approached the town. Relief at the prospect of a proper meal and a warm bed. Apprehension at the thought of parting ways with Yates. Despite her initial wariness, she had come to trust the quiet cowboy, to rely on his steady presence and surprising gentleness. Silver Creek was a small but bustling settlement, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other establishments catering to the needs of locals and travelers alike. As they rode down the street, Josephine drew her shawl more tightly around Emma, conscious of the curious glances from townsfolk unaccustomed to new faces in winter. Yates guided his horse to the hitching post outside the Silver Creek Hotel, a 2-story structure with peeling paint but clean windows. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Josephine down, his hands firm on her waist. For a brief moment, they stood close, his blue eyes meeting her brown ones with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Thank you for bringing us this far," she said softly, stepping back. Yates nodded, leading them into the hotel. The lobby was modest but clean, with a pot-bellied stove radiating welcome heat. A balding man with spectacles looked up from behind the front desk. "Afternoon, Yates," he greeted. "Didn't expect to see you in town." "Afternoon, Harold," Yates replied. "Need a room for the lady and her child." Harold's eyes flicked curiously to Josephine and the bundle in her arms. "Of course. That'll be $2 for the night, meals extra." Josephine reached for her meager purse, but Yates was faster, placing coins on the counter. "I'll cover it, Mr. Colton. I can't accept. You can pay me back when you find work," he said quietly. "For now, let's get you and Emma settled." Harold handed over a key. Room 4, top of the stairs. Dinner's served in the dining room at 6. Yates carried Josephine's small bag up the narrow staircase, opening the door to a simple room containing a bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. It was plain but clean and blessedly warm thanks to a small stove in the corner. "I'll leave you to rest," Yates said, placing her bag on the bed. "I have some business to attend to in town, but I'll return for dinner." Josephine touched his arm impulsively. "You've done more than enough, Mr. Colton. You don't need to feel responsible for us anymore." Yates looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then met her gaze steadily. "It's not about responsibility, Mrs. McKenna. I'll see you at dinner." With that, he left, closing the door softly behind him. Josephine sank onto the bed, Emma still sleeping peacefully in her arms. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to truly rest, secure in the knowledge that, at least for tonight, they were safe. Yates strode purposefully down the main street, his mind working through possibilities. He had initially planned to return to the Rockingham after delivering Josephine to Silver Creek, but something held him back. The woman and her child had awakened a protective instinct he'd thought long buried, and the idea of leaving them to fend for themselves sat poorly with him. His first stop was the general store, where he purchased necessities he suspected Josephine would need but be too proud to ask for: diapers for the baby, soap, a warmer blanket. The proprietor's wife, Mrs. Jennings, wrapped everything in brown paper, giving him a knowing smile. "For your wife and little one?" she asked innocently. Yates felt his face warm. "Not my wife, just helping a lady in need." Mrs. Jennings raised an eyebrow but said nothing more as she added a tin of hard candies to his purchase. "On the house," she insisted when he questioned the addition. "For the baby's mother. Sweet things are rare out here." Next, Yates visited the town's small newspaper office where his old friend Jacob Fisher worked as editor and publisher of the Silver Creek Sentinel. "Yates Colton," Jacob greeted him warmly. "What brings you to my humble establishment?" "Need information, Jake," Yates said, lowering his voice though they were alone. "Any wanted posters come through recently?" For a woman, maybe with a baby, Jacob's expression turned serious. "What kind of trouble are you in, Yates? Not me." "Found a woman and her infant out in that storm last night. She's running from something or someone. Just want to make sure I'm not harboring a criminal." Jacob shook his head. "No posters for women lately, just the usual cattle rustlers and bank robbers." He studied Yates closely. "But I can send telegrams if you need information from other towns." "Not yet," Yates decided. "One more thing, know of any work suitable for a lady? She'll need income." Jacob thought for a moment. Mrs. Wilson at the schoolhouse was looking for help. Her assistant left to get married last month. Yates nodded his thanks and headed to his final destination, the office of Dr. Samuel Williams. The elderly physician had been treating the people of Silver Creek for over 30 years and was known for his discretion. "The baby seems healthy enough," Yates explained after outlining the situation, "but the mother's been through a rough time." "Could you check on them?" Quietly, Dr. Williams agreed, promising to visit the hotel later that evening. Satisfied that he'd done what he could for now, Yates returned to the hotel, the package from the general store tucked under his arm. He found Josephine in the small dining room, seated in a corner with Emma cradled in one arm while she attempted to eat soup with the other. Her face brightened when she saw him, a reaction that sent an unexpected surge of pleasure through him. "You came back," she said as he took the seat across from her. "Said I would," he replied simply, placing the package beside her. "Some things you might need." Josephine looked at the package, then back at him, her eyes suspicious. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Colton? What do you want from us?" The question hung between them, direct and challenging. Yates considered his answer carefully. "Nothing," he said finally, "except to know you're safe." "Nobody does something for nothing," she countered, her voice low but intense. "Especially not for a woman alone with a baby and no husband." Yates leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Mrs. McKenna, Josephine, I lost my sister and her children to the cruelty of this frontier. I couldn't help them when they needed it most. Maybe helping you is my way of making peace with that." The raw honesty in his voice seemed to surprise her. Josephine's defensive posture softened slightly. "I'm sorry about your sister." Yates nodded, accepting her condolence. "Open the package." "Please." Hesitantly, Josephine unwrapped the brown paper, her eyes widening at the contents. Her fingers traced the soft blanket, the practical baby supplies, and finally came to rest on the tin of candies. A small, genuine smile curved her lips, transforming her face in a way that made Yates's heart skip a beat. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is very kind." "There's something else," Yates said, encouraged by her response. "The local school needs an assistant. The position includes room and board. If you're interested, I could introduce you to Mrs. Wilson tomorrow." Hope and wariness battled in Josephine's expression. "You think she would hire someone like me, with a baby and no references? Silver Creek is small, but good people live here. They judge by character, not circumstances." He paused, then added, "I also asked Dr. Williams to stop by later just to check on Emma and you." At this, Josephine's face paled. "A doctor? No, I don't want. He's a good man," Yates assured her, "and discreet." "Whatever you're running from, Josephine, he won't betray your confidence." Emma began to fuss then, saving Josephine from having to respond immediately. As she soothed the baby, Yates noticed the exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. "You need rest," he said gently. "Finish your meal, then go upstairs. I'll send the doctor up when he arrives." Josephine studied him for a long moment as if trying to read his intentions. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but Yates." She used his first name for the first time. "Thank you, truly." Later that evening, after Dr. Williams had confirmed that both mother and child were healthy despite their ordeal, Yates sat alone in the hotel's small parlor, nursing a glass of whiskey. The doctor had been discreet as promised, sharing only that Josephine and Emma were in need of rest and good nutrition. Yates found himself thinking of the way Josephine's face had lit up when she smiled, how different she looked when the wariness briefly left her eyes. There was a story there, one he was increasingly determined to uncover, not out of mere curiosity, but because he wanted to eliminate whatever threat had driven her to flee into a winter storm with a newborn. As he contemplated his next steps, a telegram boy entered the hotel, looking around before approaching him. "Mr. Colton, message for you, sir." Surprised, Yates accepted the telegram, tipping the boy before unfolding the paper. It was from his employer, Mr. Miller, inquiring about his delayed return and requesting he check on a herd of cattle that had been reported missing near Silver Creek. The timing was fortuitous. The missing cattle gave Yates a legitimate reason to remain in town, at least for a few more days. Time enough, perhaps, to see Josephine and Emma settled safely. With a plan forming in his mind, Yates finished his whiskey and headed upstairs. As he passed Josephine's door, he paused, listening for any signs of distress. Hearing nothing but silence, he continued to his own room, unaware that on the other side of the door, Josephine sat in the rocking chair by the window, watching the moonlight on the snow and wondering if she dared to trust the kind cowboy who had, in the space of a day, begun to unravel the protective walls around her heart. Morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Josephine woke to Emma's hungry cries, the room chilled despite the banked fire in the small stove. As she fed her daughter, she found herself thinking of Yates's offer to introduce her to the schoolmistress. The prospect of steady work and a safe place to live was tempting. More than tempting, it was the answer to prayers she'd been too afraid to voice. A soft knock at the door startled her. Adjusting her clothing and cradling Emma against her shoulder, she called, "Who is it?" "Yates, madam." "I've brought breakfast." Josephine opened the door to find Yates balancing a tray laden with eggs, bacon, biscuits, and steaming coffee. The domestic scene was so unexpected that she found herself momentarily speechless. "May I come in?" he asked when she continued to stare. "Of course." She stepped aside, flustered. "You didn't have to bring food up." "Thought it would be easier with the little one," he said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "And I wanted to tell you that I'll be staying in Silver Creek a few more days. Ranch business." Josephine tried to ignore the relief she felt at this news. "I see, that's good." Yates's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Mrs. Wilson is expecting us at the schoolhouse at 10 if you're still interested." "Yes," Josephine decided, surprised by her own certainty. "Yes, I am." They ate breakfast together, the silence between them growing more comfortable. Yates, Josephine was discovering, was not a man of many words, but when he did speak, his observations were thoughtful and often unexpectedly gentle. He handled Emma with increasing confidence, seemingly unbothered when she spit up on his shirt or grabbed at his fingers with her tiny hands. After breakfast, Josephine washed and dressed in her cleanest dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been quite fine. She arranged her dark hair as neatly as possible with the limited resources available, and wrapped Emma snugly in the new blanket Yates had provided. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a white clapboard building with a small bell tower. As they approached, children's voices could be heard reciting multiplication tables in unison. Yates knocked on the door, which was opened moments later by a tall woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Despite her stern appearance, her eyes were kind as they assessed the visitors. "Mr. Colton," she greeted, "and this must be Mrs. McKenna. Please, come in." The introduction went better than Josephine had dared hope. Mrs. Wilson was direct but fair, asking questions about Josephine's education and experience with children. When Josephine revealed that she had been a governess in St. Louis before circumstances forced her west, Mrs. Wilson's interest visibly increased. "A trained governess," she mused. "That's a rarity in these parts, and you can teach music as well." "Yes, madam. Piano primarily, though I'm familiar with other instruments." Mrs. Wilson's gaze shifted to Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in Josephine's arms. "The baby will complicate matters, of course, but the school has a small room at the back that could serve as your quarters. It's modest but private." "The baby is very good," Josephine assured her. "And I'm used to managing with little sleep." Mrs. Wilson studied her for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "Very well, Mrs. McKenna. You may start tomorrow, 8 o'clock sharp. The position pays $20 a month plus room and board." Josephine felt lightheaded with relief. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I won't disappoint you." As they left the schoolhouse, Josephine turned to Yates, unable to contain her excitement. "I can't believe it. A real job, a place to stay, Yates. I don't know how to thank you." Yates's eyes crinkled at the corners, the closest he seemed to come to a full smile. "No need for thanks. You earned that position yourself." Impulsively, Josephine reached for his hand, squeezing it briefly before letting go. "Nevertheless, I am grateful for everything." That afternoon, Yates helped Josephine move her few belongings to the small room behind the schoolhouse. It was indeed modest, just large enough for a narrow bed, a crib that Mrs. Wilson had found in storage, a small table, and a chest of drawers. but it was clean and warm, with a window that looked out onto a stand of pine trees. And most importantly, it was safe. As Yates set down her bag, Josephine realized with a pang that their paths would soon diverge. He had fulfilled his self-appointed duty to see her settled, and she had no claim on his time or attention beyond that. "Will you leave for your ranch tomorrow?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual as she arranged Emma's things in the crib. "Not yet," Yates replied. "Still have those missing cattle to look into. Might take a few days." "Oh." Josephine busied herself with unpacking to hide her relief. "Well, if you need any help." Yates raised an eyebrow. "With rounding up cattle," Josephine laughed, the sound surprising them both. "Perhaps not. But if you need anything else." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed, fragile but undeniable. "I'll remember that," Yates said softly. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Josephine threw herself into her new position, helping Mrs. Wilson with the younger children in the mornings while Emma napped in her crib in the back room. In the afternoons, when school let out, she would walk into town with Emma, sometimes meeting Yates for a late lunch at the hotel. Yates, for his part, spent his days riding the surrounding countryside, ostensibly searching for the missing cattle. In reality, he found himself increasingly preoccupied with gathering information about Josephine's possible pursuers. He sent telegrams to contacts in nearby towns, asking discreetly about any strangers looking for a woman and baby. The answers, when they came, were negative, giving him hope that perhaps Josephine had truly escaped whatever danger had sent her fleeing. Each evening, he would stop by the schoolhouse, often bringing small gifts, a jar of honey from the general store, wildflowers he'd picked along the trail, a wooden rattle he'd carved himself for Emma. Josephine accepted each offering with a mixture of pleasure and uncertainty, as if unaccustomed to such attentions. On the fourth night, as snow began to fall again outside the schoolhouse windows, Josephine finally shared a piece of her story. "I was governess to a wealthy family in St. Louis," she began, her fingers nervously pleating the fabric of her skirt as they sat at the small table in her room. Emma slept peacefully in her crib nearby. "The Hargroves. They had 3 children, all girls. I loved them dearly." Yates remained silent, giving her space to continue in her own time. "Mr. Hargrove's brother, Vernon, came to stay with the family last spring. He was attentive to me from the beginning, too attentive." Her voice hardened. "I rejected his advances, of course. But he was persistent and powerful within the family." Yates's jaw tightened, but he kept his anger in check, not wanting to interrupt her flow of words. "One night he cornered me in the library. When I resisted him, he became violent. I managed to escape, but not before." She trailed off, her eyes flickering to Emma. Understanding dawned on Yates, followed by a wave of fury so intense he had to clench his fists to remain still. "Emma," he said softly. Josephine nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I didn't know what to do. If I had stayed, the scandal would have ruined me and Vernon would have denied everything. His family would have believed him, so I ran. I had saved some money, enough to get me west. I thought I could start over somewhere no one knew me. Did he follow you? I don't know. But before I left, he threatened to find me if I ever told anyone what happened. He said he would take the baby and see me imprisoned for theft. He planted a family heirloom in my room." Her hands trembled as she wiped away tears. "I've been looking over my shoulder ever since." Yates reached across the table, covering her hands with his own. "Josephine, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his. Vulnerability and strength mingled in her gaze. "I won't let him hurt you or Emma, ever. You have my word." "You can't promise that," she whispered. "You don't know him, how connected his family is." I know these mountains, Yates countered. I know these people. And I know that a man who would do what he did deserves no protection from anyone. Josephine stared at him, wanting desperately to believe in the safety he offered. Why do you care so much, Yates? You barely know me. Yates's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. I'm starting to think that's not true. I know you're brave and determined. I know you love your daughter fiercely. I know you're smart and kind, even after everything you've been through. He paused, his blue eyes intense. And I know that since I found you in that barn, I haven't been able to imagine letting you go. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Josephine's breath caught in her throat. Yates. A sharp knock at the schoolhouse door interrupted her response. They both froze, years of wariness making Josephine instantly alert to potential danger. Stay here, Yates said, rising and moving silently to the door that connected her room to the main schoolhouse. Josephine gathered Emma from her crib, holding the sleeping baby close as she listened to Yates's footsteps crossing to the entrance. She heard the door open, followed by the low murmur of male voices. After what felt like an eternity, Yates returned, his expression grave. It's Jacob Fisher from the newspaper, he explained. He's received information I need to discuss with him. Will you be all right if I go with him? Josephine nodded, though anxiety curled in her stomach. Of course, we'll be fine. Yates hesitated, then stepped closer, gently touching her cheek. Lock the door behind me. I'll return as soon as I can. After he left, Josephine secured the door as instructed, then paced the small room, too agitated to sleep. Emma stirred and began to cry, sensing her mother's distress. As Josephine soothed her daughter, she tried to calm her own racing thoughts. Had Yates truly meant what he said? And what news had arrived that required his immediate attention? Outside, Yates followed Jacob to the newspaper office, his mind working through possibilities. The telegraph Jacob had received was brief but alarming. A man matching Vernon Hargrove's description had been asking questions in a town 60 miles east, specifically about a young woman traveling with an infant. He's offering a substantial reward, Jacob explained as they entered his office. Claims she's his wife, that she's unstable and took their child without permission. Yates's expression darkened. He's lying. The man is a rapist hiding behind his family's wealth and influence. Jacob's eyebrows rose at the vehemence in his friend's voice. You believe her story, then? Completely. Yates paced the small office. How much time do we have? Hard to say. The telegraph came from Riverdale. If he's still there asking questions, maybe 2 days before he reaches Silver Creek, assuming he continues west. Yates nodded grimly. Then we have work to do. By the time Yates returned to the schoolhouse, he had formulated a plan. Josephine opened the door at his knock, relief evident in her face when she saw him. What's happened? She asked immediately, leading him into her room. Yates told her about the telegraph, watching as the color drained from her face. He's found me, she whispered, sinking onto the bed. Oh God, he's found me. Not yet, Yates assured her, kneeling before her and taking her hands. And he won't if you trust me. Josephine looked at him, fear battling with hope in her eyes. What do you suggest? We leave tomorrow. My family has a cabin in the high country, a day's ride from here. No one knows about it except my brother, who's in Colorado. We go there, lay low until we can figure out a more permanent solution. But my position here, the school, Mrs. Wilson will understand. Jacob is explaining the situation to her tonight. Yates squeezed her hands gently. Josephine, I know I'm asking you to trust me completely, and that's not easy for you. But I promise you, I will keep you and Emma safe. Josephine studied him, this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly and changed everything. In his eyes, she saw nothing but sincerity and a depth of feeling that both frightened and exhilarated her. "All right," she said finally. "We'll go with you." Yates's relief was palpable. "Thank you. Pack only what's essential. We leave at first light." That night, as Josephine prepared for their departure, she found herself thinking not of the danger that pursued them, but of Yates's words earlier. "Since I found you in that barn, I haven't been able to imagine letting you go." The admission had awakened something in her. She'd thought Vernon Hargrove had destroyed forever the capacity to trust, to hope, perhaps even to love. As dawn broke, Yates arrived with a wagon rather than his horse, the bed covered with a canvas tarp to shield them from the elements. Mrs. Wilson was with him, her usual stern demeanor softened by concern. "I'm sorry your time with us was so brief, Mrs. McKenna," she said as she helped Josephine load her few belongings into the wagon. "Your position will be waiting for you should you be able to return." "Thank you," Josephine said, touched by the older woman's kindness. "For everything." They set out as the sun crested the eastern mountains, Emma securely bundled against Josephine's chest. Yates drove the team steadily, taking less traveled roads that wound ever higher into the mountains. By midday, they had left all signs of civilization behind, the landscape transforming into pristine wilderness. "How much farther?" Josephine asked as they stopped briefly to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of bread and cheese. "Another few hours," Yates replied, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. "The cabin sits in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by ridges. Good water source, plenty of game. My father built it as a hunting lodge, but it's comfortable enough." Josephine nodded, adjusting Emma's blankets against the mountain chill. "Yates, I never finished what I was going to say last night before Jacob arrived." Yates turned to her, his expression carefully neutral. "No need to, there is," she interrupted gently. "What you said about not being able to imagine letting me go. I need you to know that I feel the same way." She took a deep breath, vulnerability evident in her face. "I never expected to trust a man again, not after what happened. But you've shown me that there are good men in this world, men of honor and kindness." Yates moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Josephine." She leaned into his touch, her eyes holding his. "I'm not ready to promise anything. There's too much uncertainty, too much fear still. But I want you to know that whatever happens, meeting you has been a blessing I never thought to receive." In response, Yates bent slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. It was brief, almost reverent, but it sealed something between them, a promise, a beginning. They continued their journey in a companionable silence charged with new awareness. As the afternoon waned, the trail narrowed, winding through dense pine forest before opening suddenly into a small, sheltered valley. There, nestled against the base of a towering cliff, stood a sturdy log cabin, its windows dark but intact, a stone chimney rising from the peaked roof. "It's beautiful," Josephine breathed as Yates helped her down from the wagon. "It's not much," he said, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice, "but it's solid and warm once the fire's going." The interior of the cabin was simple but well-crafted, a main room with a large stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 bedrooms off to one side. Everything was covered in a layer of dust, but otherwise, the cabin appeared well-maintained. While Josephine fed and changed Emma, Yates busied himself lighting the fire and bringing in supplies from the wagon. By the time darkness fell, the cabin was warm and filled with the appetizing smell of venison stew cooking over the fire. They ate at the rough-hewn table. Emma sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle Yates had constructed from a wooden crate lined with blankets. Outside, snow began to fall again, the soft hiss of flakes against the windows creating a cocoon of isolation that felt not like imprisonment, but protection. "How long do you think we'll need to stay here?" Josephine asked as they washed the dishes together. Yates considered the question. "Hard to say. Jacob promised to send word when it's safe. A week, maybe more." Josephine nodded, passing him a plate to dry. "And then what? I can't keep running forever, Yates. It's no life for Emma." "No, it isn't," he agreed, his voice thoughtful. "There might be a more permanent solution, but I need time to arrange it." "What kind of solution?" Yates set down the dish towel, turning to face her fully. "Josephine, I know this is fast, maybe too fast given everything you've been through, but I've been thinking." He paused, uncharacteristically hesitant. "If we were married, Hargrove would have no claim on Emma. Legally, she would be my daughter." Josephine stared at him, stunned by the proposal. "Yates, we barely know each other." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know I want to protect you both. I know I care for you more than I thought possible in such a short time. The rest we can learn together if you're willing." Before Josephine could respond, a noise outside caught their attention, the distant sound of horses approaching. Yates moved instantly to the window, peering through the falling snow. "Get Emma," he said tersely. "Take her to the back bedroom and stay there." Fear clutched at Josephine's heart as she gathered her sleeping daughter and retreated to the smaller bedroom. Through the thin walls, she could hear Yates moving about, presumably retrieving his rifle. The approaching hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped, followed by the crunch of boots on snow. A heavy knock sounded at the door. Josephine held her breath, clutching Emma tightly as the baby stirred and whimpered. "Who's there?" Yates called, his voice steady and authoritative. "Marshal Dawson, Silver Creek." "Open up, Colton." Josephine felt a surge of relief at the lawman's voice, which she recognized from town. She heard the door open, followed by the stomping of boots as snow was cleared from them. "Evening, Marshal," Yates said. "What brings you up here in this weather?" "Looking for you and the lady," Marshal Dawson replied. "Got some news you'll want to hear." Cautiously, Josephine emerged from the bedroom, Emma now awake and fussing in her arms. The marshal nodded respectfully in her direction, removing his hat. "Madam, glad to see you're safe." "What's happened?" Yates asked, his stance relaxed but alert. "That fella from back east, the one asking questions. He arrived in Silver Creek this afternoon." The marshal's weathered face broke into a grim smile. "Made quite a scene at the hotel, demanding information about a woman and baby. Said he was the husband, the baby his." Josephine's knees weakened and she sank into a chair by the fire. "He found me," she whispered. "Not exactly," the marshal countered. "See, Mrs. Wilson and Jacob Fisher had prepared folks in town. When this Hargrove fella started throwing his weight around, making accusations, Mrs. Wilson stood right up in the middle of the hotel dining room and announced that the woman he was describing had been her assistant at the school, a widow named Mrs. Johnson, who had tragically lost her husband to fever back east." "A widow," Josephine repeated, confused. "Yes, madam. And according to Mrs. Wilson, this widow had received word just yesterday that her brother in Oregon had sent for her, and she'd left on the morning stage. Even had the stagecoach company confirm that a woman and baby matching your description had bought tickets to Portland." Understanding dawned on Josephine's face. "They sent him on a false trail." "All the way to Oregon," the marshal confirmed. "And that's not all. While he was making his accusations, one of the local girls, Sally from the dress shop, got a look at the photograph he was showing around. Said it wasn't you at all, but some other dark-haired lady. By the time he left town, half the folks were convinced he was either crazy or a criminal himself." Yates moved to Josephine's side, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. "You're sure he followed the Oregon lead?" "Watched him board the westbound stage myself not 2 hours ago," the marshal assured them. "Paid extra for the driver to make good time." Relief flooded through Josephine, so intense she felt lightheaded. "I can't believe it. All those people helping us." "Silver Creek takes care of its own," the marshal said simply. "And from what Mrs. Wilson says, you're one of ours now." He turned to Yates. "I can escort you both back to town tomorrow if you'd like." Yates looked down at Josephine, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, and he turned back to the marshal. "We appreciate the offer, but I think we'll stay here a few more days just to be certain, if that's all right with Mrs. McKenna." "It is," Josephine confirmed, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spreading through her chest. After the marshal departed, declining their offer to stay the night in favor of reaching the way station a few miles down the mountain, Josephine and Yates sat before the fire, Emma sleeping peacefully once more in her improvised cradle. "It seems almost too easy," Josephine said softly, watching the flames dance. "After all this time running, afraid." "Not easy," Yates corrected. "Just good people doing the right thing." He hesitated, then added, "About what I said earlier before the marshal arrived, your proposal," Josephine supplied, turning to face him. "Yes, I want you to know there's no pressure. It was just an idea, a way to provide protection." Yates ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "But if you want to return to Silver Creek, continue teaching, that's fine too. I'll still do everything I can to keep you both safe." Josephine studied him in the firelight, this quiet, honorable man who had changed her life so completely in such a short time. The idea of marriage was frightening after everything she'd experienced, and yet, "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like to accept your proposal. Not just for protection, though I'm grateful for that, but because in these few days you've shown me what kind of man you are, Yates Colton. And I find myself wanting to build a life with that man if he'll have me." The joy that transformed Yates's face was answer enough, but he gathered her hands in his, bringing them to his lips. "I'll spend every day making sure you never regret that decision," he promised. Josephine leaned forward, initiating a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, tentative at first, then deepening as Yates responded with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "Where will we live?" she asked practically. "The ranch," Yates shook his head. "I've been thinking about that. The Rocking M has been good to me, but I've saved enough over the years to buy a small spread of my own. There's a parcel of land for sale just outside Silver Creek, good water, decent grazing. It would be a start." "Our own home," Josephine marveled, the concept almost too wonderful to comprehend after months of running. "For you, me, and Emma," Yates confirmed. "And maybe, someday, brothers and sisters for her if you want that." The thought of more children, once terrifying, now filled Josephine with unexpected longing. "I think I would like that very much," she admitted. "Though perhaps not right away." Yates chuckled, the sound warm and reassuring. "We have time, Josephine. All the time in the world." They remained by the fire long into the night, talking of plans and dreams, of fears conquered and hopes renewed. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the small valley in pristine white, a clean slate upon which they would write their future together. The morning broke clear and cold, sunlight glinting off the new-fallen snow with blinding brilliance. Josephine woke slowly, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was: the cabin, safety, Yates. The events of the previous night came back to her, and she felt a surge of happiness so intense it was almost painful. She rose quietly, checking on Emma, who still slept soundly, before making her way to the main room. Yates was already up, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. He turned at her approach, his face lighting with a smile that made her heart skip. "Good morning," he said, crossing to her and placing a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Sleep well, better than I have in months," she admitted, leaning into his solid warmth. "It's strange to wake up without fear." Yates's arms came around her, holding her close. "Get used to it. That's how every morning will be from now on." They spent the day in domestic tranquility, Yates showing Josephine the features of the cabin and the surrounding area. He took her to the small stream that ran nearby, now partially frozen but still flowing beneath the ice. He pointed out the tracks of deer and rabbits in the snow, promising to teach her to hunt if she wished to learn. Josephine found herself relaxing fully for the first time since Vernon Hargrove had entered her life. Here, in this isolated valley with Yates and Emma, she felt not just safe but truly at peace. The shadow of the past still existed, but it no longer dominated her every thought and action. In the afternoon, as Emma napped and a venison stew simmered over the fire, Yates surprised Josephine by producing a small leather pouch from his saddlebag. "I've been carrying this for years," he explained, opening the pouch to reveal a simple gold band. "It was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for when I found the right woman." He looked up, his blue eyes intense. "I'd like you to have it if you will." Josephine's breath caught as Yates took the ring between his fingers. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Not fancy," he acknowledged, "but solid gold like my parents' marriage was. 50 years they were together, through all kinds of hardship." "I would be honored to wear it," Josephine said, extending her left hand. Yates slid the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. "When we return to Silver Creek, we'll make it official. The circuit preacher comes through every month." Josephine examined the ring on her finger, the simple band catching the firelight. "Your mother would have approved of me, of Emma. She would have loved you both," Yates assured her. "She always said a person should be judged by how they face adversity, not by the adversity itself. And you, Josephine McKenna, have faced yours with more courage than most men I know." That evening, as they sat together on the small sofa before the fire, Emma sleeping contentedly in her cradle, Josephine found herself telling Yates more about her life before her childhood in a small Pennsylvania town, her education at a ladies' seminary, her decision to become a governess after her parents' deaths left her without resources. In turn, he shared stories of his family, his stern but fair father, his gentle mother, his sister who had married a man who took her west to Oregon, only to die of fever along with her children when medical help couldn't be found in time. "That's why I couldn't leave you and Emma out there in that storm," he admitted. "I kept thinking of Sarah, alone and afraid with her children. I wasn't there to help her, but I could help you." Josephine's hand found his, squeezing gently. "I'm sorry about your sister, but I'm grateful that her memory led you to us." They stayed at the cabin for 3 more days, using the time to better know each other, to establish rhythms and routines that would serve them well in their life together. Josephine discovered Yates's quiet sense of humor, his patience, his unexpected knowledge of literature gleaned from long winter nights with only books for company. Yates learned of Josephine's love of music, her quick mind, her determination to create a good life for Emma despite the circumstances of the child's conception. On the morning of the 4th day, they packed their belongings and prepared to return to Silver Creek. As Yates secured the last of their supplies in the wagon, Josephine took a final look around the cabin that had become, in such a short time, a sanctuary she would always remember fondly. "We'll come back," Yates promised, noting her wistful expression. In the summer, when the wildflowers carpet the valley, it can be our retreat. The journey back to town was leisurely, both of them savoring these last hours of solitude before rejoining the community. As they crested the final ridge and Silver Creek came into view, Josephine felt not dread but anticipation. This place, so recently strange to her, now represented home and safety. Their arrival caused a stir, with several townspeople stopping to greet them and confirm that Vernon Hargrove had indeed departed on the westbound stage. Mrs. Wilson welcomed Josephine back with uncharacteristic warmth, insisting she resume her position at the school immediately. "The children have missed you," she said, "and I've found that I'm quite attached to little Emma myself." Life settled into a pleasant routine. Josephine taught at the school during the day, Emma either sleeping in her cradle in the back room or being doted on by Mrs. Wilson. Yates divided his time between his duties at the Rocking M and preparations for their future together, finalizing the purchase of the small ranch he'd mentioned and beginning construction on a house that would be their home. The circuit preacher arrived as expected, and on a bright Sunday morning in February, Josephine McKenna became Josephine Colton in a simple ceremony attended by the entire town. She wore a new dress of deep blue, made by Sally from the dress shop as a wedding gift, and carried a bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers. Emma, now almost 3 months old, was held by Mrs. Wilson, who dabbed at her eyes throughout the ceremony despite her protests that she never cried at weddings. That night, in the privacy of the small house Yates had rented in town until their own home was ready, Josephine experienced the gentle, reverent love of a good man for the first time. Yates was patient and tender, understanding her initial nervousness and guiding her past it to discover the joy that could exist between a man and woman who truly cared for each other. As spring approached, bringing with it new growth and promise, their house on the small ranch was completed, a sturdy structure of logs and stone, with large windows to let in light and a wide porch where Josephine could sit and watch the sunset while Emma played. Yates had insisted on building a proper bedroom for Emma, though for now the baby's cradle remained in their room. "She'll grow into it," he said when Josephine questioned the need for such a large nursery. "And so will her brothers and sisters when they come along." Josephine smiled at his confidence in their future, a confidence she increasingly shared. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long had faded, replaced by a deep contentment and growing love for the man who had found her in the darkness and called her his own. One evening in early April, as they sat on their new porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple, Emma sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, Josephine turned to Yates with a question that had been on her mind. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't sought shelter in that barn that night?" Yates considered the question, his hand absently stroking Emma's dark curls. "I try not to think about it," he admitted. "The idea of you and Emma out there alone." He shook his head. "I prefer to believe it wasn't chance, Josephine. My mother always said God puts people in our path for a reason." "And what reason was that, do you think?" she pressed, leaning against his shoulder. Yates looked down at her, his eyes reflecting the same wonder she felt at the journey that had brought them together. "To heal us both," he said simply. "You needed safety and protection. I needed—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I needed a family to love, to fill the emptiness left by those I'd lost." Josephine reached up, touching his face gently. "And now we have that, a family." "Yes," Yates agreed, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "You, me, and Emma, and whoever else might join us along the way." Josephine smiled, taking his free hand and placing it on her stomach. "Perhaps sooner than you think." Yates's eyes widened, comprehension dawning slowly. Josephine, are you saying? She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. Dr. Williams confirmed it yesterday. By Christmas, Emma will have a little brother or sister. The look of pure happiness that transformed Yates's face was one Josephine knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He gathered her close, careful not to disturb the sleeping Emma, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "for trusting me that night in the barn, for giving me a chance to love you and Emma, for this new life we're creating together." "No," Josephine corrected gently, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Yates Colton, for lighting that lantern in the darkness and calling us your own." As the last light of day faded and the first stars appeared in the Montana sky, they remained on the porch, a family bound not by circumstance or convention, but by a love that had found them when they least expected it and needed it most. For Josephine, who had once hidden in the shadows with a crying baby, afraid and alone, the future now stretched before her bright with promise and possibility, all because a cowboy had lit a lantern and opened his heart. 5 years later, the Colton Ranch had prospered, growing from a modest homestead to one of the most respected small cattle operations in the territory. The house had expanded as well, with additional rooms built to accommodate their growing family. Emma, now a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. James, their 4-year-old son, serious and thoughtful like Yates. And the twins, Sarah and Joshua, just learning to walk and getting into mischief at every opportunity. Josephine stood on the porch, watching as Yates taught Emma to ride her new pony, a birthday gift he'd been preparing her for all summer. The little girl sat straight and proud in the saddle, following her father's instructions with careful attention. James sat on the fence, observing with the solemn concentration that was his hallmark, while the twins played in the dirt nearby under the watchful eye of Mary, a young woman from town who helped Josephine with the children and housework. The scene filled Josephine's heart with contentment so complete it sometimes frightened her. Life had taught her that happiness could be fleeting, that security could be an illusion. But as the years passed without any sign of Vernon Hargrove, those fears had gradually subsided. Silver Creek had embraced them fully, and the secret of Emma's parentage was known only to Yates and herself, a burden shared and thus lightened. Yates glanced up, catching Josephine's eye across the yard. The smile he sent her still had the power to make her heart skip, even after 5 years of marriage. He said something to Emma, then handed the pony's lead to James and crossed to the porch. "You're looking mighty fine this afternoon, Mrs. Colton," he said, climbing the steps and pulling her into his arms for a kiss that was both familiar and thrilling. "You're not so bad yourself, Mr. Colton," she replied, smoothing a hand over his shirt front, "though you could use a shave." Yates laughed, rubbing his stubbled jaw against her neck until she squirmed. "Later. Right now I have news." "What kind of news?" Josephine asked, recognizing the excitement in his eyes. "Jacob Fisher just rode out from town. There's a new music teacher coming to Silver Creek, and Mrs. Wilson wants to know if you'd consider taking on some students, private lessons, here at the ranch if you prefer." Josephine's eyes widened. Though she still occasionally played the old piano Yates had surprised her with on their first anniversary, her musical talents had taken a backseat to motherhood and ranch life. Really? After all this time? Apparently, several families have been asking for someone to teach their daughters. "And Mrs. Wilson says no one plays as beautifully as you do." Yates tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "What do you think? The twins are old enough now that you could spare a few hours each week." The idea appealed to Josephine more than she'd expected. As much as she loved her family and the life they'd built, There was a part of her that missed the intellectual stimulation of teaching. "I think I'd like that very much," she decided. "As long as it doesn't take too much time away from the children and you." Yates kissed her again, his arms tightening around her waist. "I'm proud of you, Josephine. You've built a good life here for all of us." "We built it together," she corrected, leaning into his strength. "That night in the barn I was so afraid, so certain I'd never find safety or happiness again. If someone had told me then what the future held." "You wouldn't have believed them," Yates finished, his expression softening as he gazed at their children playing in the yard. "Neither would I, but here we are." A shout from Emma drew their attention. The little girl had managed to guide her pony in a complete circle on her own, her face alight with triumph. "Mama, Papa, did you see? I did it all by myself." "We saw, sweetheart," Josephine called back, her heart swelling with pride. "You're doing wonderfully." As Yates returned to their daughter's side, Josephine remained on the porch, watching the family that had seemed an impossible dream not so long ago. From the ashes of tragedy and fear, they had forged something beautiful and enduring, a love strong enough to heal old wounds and create new beginnings. The shadow of the past would always be there, a reminder of how precious their happiness was. But it no longer defined her, no longer dictated her choices or limited her dreams. Instead, it served as a contrast that made the light of her present life shine all the brighter. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Josephine and Yates sat together on the porch swing, a blanket draped over their laps against the evening chill. The stars spread across the Montana sky like diamonds scattered on velvet, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting in a dilapidated barn during a winter storm. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Josephine asked, her head resting on Yates's shoulder. "After you found me hiding in the shadows with Emma." Yates's arm tightened around her. "Sleep well, Mrs. McKenna. You're under my protection now," he recited, the words still clear in his memory after all these years. Josephine nodded, a smile curving her lips. "I thought you were just being kind. I never imagined you meant forever." "Neither did I at that moment," Yates admitted. "But something happened when I saw you there, so brave and frightened at the same time, trying to protect your baby against impossible odds. It was like a piece of my heart that had been missing suddenly found its way home." Josephine turned in his arms, looking up at the face she had come to love beyond measure, the strong lines softened by tenderness, the blue eyes that saw her completely and loved her anyway. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being the kind of man who stops to help a stranger in a storm, who offers protection without expecting anything in return." Yates bent to kiss her, a kiss filled with the depth of feeling that had grown between them over the years. "Thank you," he countered, "for being the kind of woman brave enough to trust again, to build a life with me, to give me children to love and a home worth coming back to every day." As the night deepened around them, they remained on the porch, talking softly of the day's events, of plans for the future, of the journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. And when they finally went inside, hand in hand, it was with the shared knowledge that what had begun in darkness and fear had blossomed into something neither of them had dared to hope for, a love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead, as strong and enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home. For Josephine, who had once hidden in the shadows with a crying baby, afraid and alone, life had come full circle. The cowboy who had lit a lantern in her darkest hour had indeed made her his own, not as a possession to be claimed, but as a partner to be cherished, respected, and loved. And in that love, she had found not just safety, but a joy beyond anything she could have imagined on that cold winter night when fate had led Yates Colton to her door.